The marketplace was alive with noise and color. Merchants shouting over one another, strange alien foods sizzling in open stalls, and the smell of metal and fuel drifting in from the nearby docking bays. Mark Wren walked through the crowd, tired, from the long cargo run he had just finished. He had risked his ship and his life delivering dangerous goods to a wealthy alien merchant named Vorik. And now he was ready to be paid in full. Vorik waited for him in a shaded corner, his long, insect-like fingers tapping against a crate. His eyes were narrow and calculating as he greeted Mark with a smile that never reached his eyes. Mark crossed his arms and said he wanted his payment in credits, just as they had agreed before the job. But Vorik chuckled and said, "Credits. I have something more valuable." From behind a curtain, two guards dragged a young alien girl into the light. She was thin, with pale skin that seemed to glow faintly under the market lamps. Her wrists were bound with dull metal cuffs, and her silver eyes avoided everyone. There were strange markings on her skin, almost like they had been painted there long ago. Mark frowned, confused. "What is this?" he asked. Vorik spread his hands wide. "Your payment," he said smoothly. "She is difficult. No one wants her. She has no value to me, so I give her to you, worth more than any pile of credits." Mark shook his head. He didn't deal in slaves. Never had, never would. But Vorik leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Mark could hear. "Payment is payment. Human, you did the job. Now, you take her. I won't give you anything else." The crowd nearby began to whisper, curious about the scene. Some looked at the girl with fear, others with pity. A few muttered that she was cursed, that the last man who owned her had vanished without a trace. The girl stayed silent, her head lowered, but Mark could feel her gaze on him. There was something strange in the way she stood, like she was forcing herself to remain still. He glanced around the marketplace. Eyes were on them from every corner. Mark sighed, realizing that if he made a scene, Vorik could cause trouble for him. Reluctantly, he agreed. But he told himself he would free her as soon as he could. Vorik smiled in satisfaction and handed over a small control device for the cuffs. The guards released their grip on the girl, and she stepped closer to Mark without saying a word. Her movements were cautious, careful, as though she was afraid of making a wrong step. Mark noticed her bare feet were dusty and scratched from walking on the rough market stones. He guided her through the crowd toward his ship, ignoring the curious and sometimes mocking looks from strangers. Once aboard his small cargo vessel, Mark led her to the crew quarters. He unlocked the cuffs and set them on the table. She rubbed her wrists but still didn't speak. He gave her a container of water and a ration pack. She hesitated before eating, glancing at him as if unsure if it was really for her. When she finally took a bite, she ate slowly, like she was trying to make the food last. Mark leaned against the wall, watching her, wondering what kind of life she had been living before this moment. The silence between them was heavy. He tried asking her name, but she only shook her head slightly, refusing to answer. Her silver eyes, however, seemed to follow every movement in the room, as if she was always alert, always ready to react. Mark decided not to push her for answers. Instead, he told her she could rest. He would figure out what to do next in the morning, that night. As Mark sat in the cockpit, checking his ship's systems, he couldn't shake the strange feeling that came with having her aboard. He glanced at the security monitors. She was sitting in the small bunk, staring out the window at the stars. Her face was unreadable, but there was a weight in her expression. Something deep and hidden. Outside the docking bay was quiet, but in the upper shadows of the market rooftops, unseen to Mark, figures moved silently. Watching the ship, their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. And their focus was not on him, but on the girl he had just taken in. The faint hum of the ship's systems masked the sound of distant movement. And Mark had no idea that by accepting her as payment, he had just stepped into a dangerous game. He did not yet understand. Mark didn't sleep much that night. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silence. But his mind kept drifting back to the girl. She hadn't made a sound since they left the market, not even when he gave her food and water. It was as if she was made of glass, silent, fragile, and ready to shatter. When morning cycle came, Mark found her sitting in the same spot on the bunk, staring out at the stars. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "You should rest," he told her, but she didn't answer. She just lowered her gaze and traced her fingers along the strange markings on her arm. Mark moved to the cockpit to check the navigation systems. The ship's course was set for a small trading post a few jumps away, a safe place where he could leave her with a relief group that helped freed slaves. But as he adjusted the controls, a strange beeping came from the comms console. It wasn't a normal message. The signal was encrypted layer after layer of security coding. Mark frowned. He had hauled cargo for years. And this wasn't the kind of signal you picked up by accident. He tapped a few keys, trying to trace it. The origin was masked, but the code itself was unlike anything he had seen. The strange part? It was directed at his ship specifically. He glanced back toward the crew quarters. The girl was now standing at the doorway, watching him quietly. Her silver eyes reflected the faint glow of the console lights. "You know what this is?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer and looked at the comms screen for a brief moment. Something flickered in her expression, recognition, and maybe even fear. The beeping stopped, leaving a strange stillness. In the air, she turned and walked back to the bunk without a word. Mark leaned back in his seat, suspicion growing stronger. Hours later, they were still drifting in deep space. The girl, he still didn't know her name, sat cross-legged by the viewport, gazing at the endless black. At one point, he heard her whisper softly in a language he didn't recognize. The words were slow, almost like a prayer. Finally, he tried. "Again, if we're going to be stuck in the same ship, I need to know your name." She hesitated, then said in a low voice, "Call me Lyra." It was the first real thing she had told him, and it felt heavy, like the name itself carried a secret. Before he could ask more, the ship's scanners beeped. A patrol vessel had appeared on the edge of their radar. The signal was faint, but moving directly toward them. Mark's hands tightened on the controls. "Trouble," he muttered. Lyra moved quickly, slipping into the shadows near the cockpit. Her breathing was quiet but fast. Her eyes stayed locked on the approaching dot on the screen. The patrol ship hailed them. Mark answered calmly, trying to sound like just another trader. But the questions were sharp. What was his cargo? Who was on board? Where was he heading? Mark lied smoothly, saying he was alone and just passing through. The patrol didn't seem convinced. They scanned the ship, and Mark's heart pounded. He shot a glance toward where Lyra was hiding. She was gripping the wall, her knuckles pale. The scan completed, and after a tense pause, the patrol ship cut communication and veered off. Lyra stayed frozen for a moment before slowly coming out of hiding. Her shoulders were tense. "They were looking for me," she whispered. Mark didn't reply, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. If Vorik had truly thought she was worthless, then why were patrol ships searching for her? Why was his comms console getting encrypted messages the moment she stepped aboard? Mark didn't have answers yet, but one thing was certain: whatever Lyra was running from, it was powerful enough to reach across the stars to find her. The small trading post was supposed to be quiet, a place where no one asked questions. Mark had docked there many times before, always in and out without trouble. This time, as his ship slid into the landing bay, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were already on him. Lyra stayed close as they stepped down the ramp. Her gaze flicked to every shadow, every passerby, as if she expected danger at any moment. Mark led her toward the station's main hall. planning to contact a relief group and hand her over somewhere safe. He told himself this wasn't his fight. He was just delivering her to safety and moving on. But before they could reach the cum station, the loud metallic stomp of boots echoed from the far end of the corridor. Mark turned his head and saw a squad of armored alien soldiers pushing through the crowd. Their leader, a tall figure in dark red armor, raised a holographic image for everyone to see, was Lyra. The soldier's voice was cold as it carried. Across the hall, by order of the council, we are searching for a dangerous fugitive. She is armed, dangerous, and must be returned immediately. Anyone hiding her will be executed. Mark felt Lyra's hand tighten around his arm. He glanced at her face, pale, tense, her silver eyes locked on the soldiers. In a low voice, she whispered, "They're here for me." Thinking fast, Mark led her down a side passage. Keeping his pace calm so as not to draw attention, they passed through a row of repair shops and into the dim-lit docking area where his ship was parked. The soldiers were already scanning ships, moving closer with each second. Mark opened the maintenance hatch at the back of the vessel. "Inside," he ordered. Lyra hesitated for a heartbeat, then climbed into the cramped crawlspace between bulkheads. The metal was cold, the space tight, but it would hide her from a standard scan. He sealed the panel just as heavy boots clanged up the ramp. The soldiers entered without knocking, their scanners sweeping the interior. "We've had reports," the leader said flatly. "Your ship was seen leaving a market." Where the fugitive was last spotted, Mark shrugged, forcing a calm smile. "I'm a trader. I pass through markets every day. Haven't seen anyone dangerous." They searched anyway. Moving from the cockpit to the cargo hold, opening storage crates, tapping on walls. The leader stopped near the maintenance hatch, his gloved hand brushing over the seam. Mark's pulse quickened. After a long pause, the soldier moved on. The scan concluded, and the leader gave Mark a final warning. "If you find her, turn her in. There is no reward for disobedience." Then they left, the sound of their boots fading into the corridor. Mark waited until the bay was silent before unlocking the maintenance hatch. Lyra crawled out slowly, her breathing shaky. She didn't speak at first, then said softly, "You could have given me to them, but you didn't. Why?" Mark didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure himself. Maybe it was because she looked so human in that moment, frightened, cornered, but still holding herself with quiet dignity. Maybe it was because he hated bullies, no matter what planet they came from. Whatever the reason, he knew now that letting her go wasn't going to be easy. The soldier's warning had made it clear helping her meant making enemies with people powerful enough to search every port in the sector. As they undocked and drifted back into space, Mark glanced at her in the co-pilot seat. "You want to tell me what you've done to have half the galaxy chasing you?" he asked. She looked out at the stars and said only, "It's not what I've done, it's who I am." And with that, he realized this was no ordinary job anymore. He had just stepped into the center of a storm, and there was no turning back. The stars outside the viewport stretched into thin white lines as Mark's ship jumped into hyperspace. The silence in the cockpit was heavy, only broken by the faint hum of the engines. Mark kept his eyes on the controls, but his thoughts were on the girl sitting beside him. She hadn't said much since the soldiers left, just sat there with her. Hands folded tightly in her lap, hours passed before she finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost like she was talking to herself. "You should know the truth." Mark glanced at her, but stayed silent. Letting her continue, she took a deep breath, her silver eyes fixed on the swirling lights of hyperspace. "I am the last living heir of the Saran Empire." Mark blinked. He had heard the name before. The Saran were an ancient alien dynasty, known for their vast fleets and strict traditions. But he also remembered the news from years ago. The empire had collapsed in a bloody coup, and the royal family had been declared dead. "You're telling me you're a princess?" He said. Lyra gave a small, bitter smile. I was, she corrected. Until my own advisors betrayed me. They killed my family and sold me into slavery to hide me from my loyalists. If the council finds me, they won't let me live long enough to speak. Mark leaned back, processing her words. It made sense, the encrypted messages, the soldiers, the fear in her eyes. Still, it was hard to believe, and those signals I picked up. He asked. She nodded. Some are from those still loyal to me. They've been searching for years, but not all of them can be trusted. The coup was thorough. Even some of my so-called protectors turned on me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the ship filled the silence. Mark rubbed the back of his neck. So what do you want from me? He asked. Lyra's gaze softened. I don't want to drag you into this. I know what will happen if you're caught with me. I just don't want to die in a cage. Mark stared at her, trying to read her expression. She didn't look like a spoiled ruler or a liar. She looked like someone who had been running for far too long, someone who had seen more betrayal than anyone. Should you realize, Mark said slowly, if what you're saying is true. Helping you puts a target on my back. We're talking about an empire's worth of enemies. Lyra nodded, her voice steady. I know. That's why I won't ask you to help. I'll leave when we reach the next port. Mark let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, sure. And watch you get snatched up by the first bounty hunter who catches your trail. Not happening. She turned to look at him, surprised. He shrugged. I'm not in the habit of abandoning people. Princess or not. For the first time, he saw a flicker of something new in her eyes, not fear. Not caution, but hope. It was faint, but it was there. The ship drifted through the silent void as they both sat in thought. Somewhere out there, Mark knew ships were hunting her. And now, by choice, they'd be hunting him too. He didn't know how this would end, but one thing was certain. Wasn't this now, whether he liked it or not, and far beyond their current position? In the cold depths of space, a coded transmission was already being sent. Its message was simple. The princess has been found. The warning lights flashed red before Mark even had time to react. The ship's sensors screamed an alert, multiple contacts closing in fast. He cursed under his breath and began scanning the readings. The shapes were small but fast, moving in tight formation. Not soldiers this time. Pirates. Lyra appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she saw the display. They're here for me, she said quietly. Mark gave her a sharp look. You're sure? She nodded. They'll try to take me alive. The bounty is higher if I'm breathing. The comms crackled, and a voice like gravel came through. Traitor ship. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. We know who you have on board. Do it quietly, and maybe you live. Mark muted the channel. Yeah, not happening, he muttered. His fingers danced over the controls. Rerouting power to the engines, the pirate ships opened fire, bursts of plasma lighting up the darkness. The first shots skimmed past the hull, but Mark's maneuvering kept them from landing a direct hit. He dove toward a nearby asteroid field. The massive rocks spun slowly in the void, their jagged surfaces casting long shadows. The pirates followed, their smaller ships weaving easily through the gaps. Lyra gripped the co-pilot seat. Shields at 50%, she reported without being asked. Mark glanced at her, surprised. You know ship systems? She didn't answer, just slid into the seat beside him and began tapping commands. A pirate torpedo locked onto them, the alarm blaring. Lyra's fingers moved fast, overriding the guidance system and sending the torpedo spiraling off into the void before it exploded harmlessly. Nice work, Mark said, twisting the ship hard to avoid another blast. The chase tore through the asteroid belt, chunks of rock spinning dangerously close. Mark pushed the ship harder than it had been built for, scraping past a narrow gap that forced one of the pirates to pull back or crash, but the others kept Coming, Lyra leaned over the console. If we loop around that cluster ahead, we can drop behind them. Mark grinned. Now, you're talking. He followed her directions, cutting power at just the right moment and letting the ship drift. Behind a spinning boulder, the pirates flew past, searching the wrong direction. Mark powered up again and swung around, catching them from the rear. His ship's weapons weren't heavy, but they were enough to punch holes in their engines. He fired, and one pirate ship spun out of control, vanishing into the rocks. The others broke formation, deciding the fight wasn't worth it within moments. Their signals faded into the distance. Mark let out a slow breath. Easing the ship out of the asteroid field, Lyra sat back, breathing hard. "You fight like someone who's done this before," she said. Mark shrugged. "Cargo runs aren't always peaceful. Besides, I had a good co-pilot." She didn't smile. But he caught the faintest glimmer of pride in her expression. Silence fell again, but this time it was different. He no longer saw her as just someone to protect. She had proven she could. Think fast, take risks, and fight back. She wasn't just a passenger. She was someone who could survive. Still, Mark knew the danger hadn't passed. The pirates wouldn't forget this, and now, both they and the council knew exactly where they were. He leaned back in his seat. "You've got enemies on every side. Lyra, we're going to need a real plan if we're going to keep ahead of them." She looked out at the stars, her voice steady. "Then let's make one." Far behind them, drifting in the shadow of an asteroid, a single pirate ship powered back up and began transmitting their location to someone far more dangerous. The ship's interior was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the control panels. Mark sat in the pilot's chair, running diagnostics after the pirate attack. The hull had taken a few scrapes, and the shields were running at 70%. But they were alive, for now. Lyra was in the co-pilot seat, staring at a small blinking light on her wrist console. Mark noticed it and frowned. "What is that?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tapped the screen and a string of alien symbols appeared. Her silver eyes flicked up to meet his. "It's a signal," she said quietly. "Encrypted coordinates from one of my loyalists, they say. They can get me to safety." Mark studied her expression. She didn't look relieved, if anything. She looked more troubled. "So, what's the problem?" he asked. Lyra leaned back, her gaze fixed on the screen. It could be real. Or it could be a trap if the coup leaders intercepted this channel. They'd send false coordinates to lure me in. The coordinates led to a system on the far edge of the sector. Barely on any trade routes. Mark didn't like it. The location was too perfect for an ambush. "If we go there," he said, "and it's a setup, we won't make it out." Lyra nodded slowly. "I know, but if it's real, it might be my only chance." They sat in silence for a long moment. The only sound was the steady hum of the engines. Outside, stars drifted by like cold, distant lanterns. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't have to go," he said. "We can find another way. Keep moving. Stay ahead of them." Lyra shook her head. "I can't keep running forever. Mark, every day I'm alive. More people who once swore loyalty to my family are executed or disappear. If I don't act now, there might be nothing left to save." Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mark ran a hand through his hair, weighing the risks. "You understand what you're asking? If I take you there, I'm walking right into their game, and if it's not a trap, it's still a fight. Because they won't just let you leave without a fight." Her silver eyes softened. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me," she said. Mark gave a short laugh. "Too late for that, princess. I've already got half the galaxy wanting me dead for the first time in hours." She smiled just barely, but it was there. "So, is that a yes?" she asked. Mark leaned back in his chair, staring at the star map. The blinking coordinates glowed like a single red heartbeat in the darkness. He could turn away, pretend this wasn't his problem. Go back to hauling cargo and making small deals in backwater markets, but he knew himself well enough to know he wouldn't. Not after what they'd been through, not after seeing her fight, and hope, and refuse to give in. Plot the course, he said finally. Lyra didn't move for a second. Then she nodded and began entering the coordinates. Her hands were steady, but he noticed her breathing had quickened. As the ship prepared for the jump, Mark adjusted the weapon systems, checking the shields twice. Whatever waited for them out there, it wouldn't catch them unprepared. The stars outside stretched into lines as the ship leaped into hyperspace. Somewhere ahead lay either their salvation or the end, and in the darkness far from their path, a silent beacon lit up in response to their jump. Someone had been waiting for them to make this choice. The stars snapped back into focus as the ship dropped out of hyperspace. The view ahead was both beautiful and unsettling. A massive planet with rings of glowing ice and rock turned slowly against the black. Around it, dozens of sleek warships hovered like silent predators. Their hulls shimmered with a faint silver crest, a symbol Lyra recognized instantly. Her breath caught. That's my family seal, she whispered. Mark kept his hands on the controls, eyes scanning every ship, and that's either good news or the worst news we've had yet. A calm, formal voice came over the comms. Unidentified vessel, power down your engines and prepare to be escorted. You are in royal space. The voice didn't sound hostile, but Mark knew better then. To trust a smooth greeting, he exchanged a look with Lyra. Your call, he said. She hesitated, then nodded. Do as they say. Mark cut the engines, and two smaller escorts slid into position beside them, guiding the ship toward the largest vessel, towering flagship that dwarfed everything else in orbit. As they docked, the airlock opened to reveal rows of soldiers in ceremonial armor. Their weapons were holstered, but their posture was sharp and ready. At their center stood an older alien with deep lines across his face and eyes like cold steel. He stepped forward, then dropped to one knee. Your Highness, he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years. The soldiers followed his lead, the sound of armor plates clicking in unison as they bowed. Mark glanced at Lyra, and, for the first time since they met, she didn't look afraid. She looked like someone remembering who she truly was. The older alien and admiral, by the insignia on his armor, rose to his feet. We have been searching for you since the day of the coup. Your enemies grow stronger by the hour. But with you here, we can begin to take back the throne. Mark stood off to the side, watching as they led Lyra toward the grand hall. She turned once to look at him, her silver eyes locking on his. There was a softness there now, something unspoken but clear. When the formalities ended, she came back to him, her voice quieter than before. You saved me when you didn't have to. You could have left me in that market. You could have handed me to the soldiers, but you didn't. Mark gave a small shrug. Didn't seem like the right thing to do. She smiled faintly. Stay, she said. Be my protector, my friend. More than that, be the one I can trust when everyone else might turn. Mark looked at her for a long moment. The hum of the flagship's engines beneath his feet. He could already feel the weight of the choice. Staying meant stepping into a war that wasn't his, but walking away felt impossible. Finally, he nodded. All right, princess. Looks like we've both got work to do, the admiral signaled, and the warships began to shift into formation. The fleet's engines lit the darkness with burning light. Ready to move, Lyra stood tall at the center, no longer just the frightened girl from the marketplace, but the rightful heir to a kingdom stolen from her. Mark stayed at her side as the flagship prepared to jump. Somewhere out there, enemies waited, but for the first time, it felt like they weren't running anymore. They were coming.